Hey folks, it's Marvin Cash, the host of The Articulate Fly. On this episode, I'm joined by Bugman Eric Naguski. Eric shares a lifetime of knowledge on fly fishing in Pennsylvania and the patterns and tactics you need to be successful. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. But before we get to the interview, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you like the podcast, please tell a friend and please subscribe and leave us a rating and review in the podcatcher of your choice. It really helps us out. And a shout out to this episode's sponsor. This episode's sponsored by our friends at Norvise. Their motto is, tie better flies faster, and they produce the only vise that truly spins. To see for yourself in 2022, the folks from Norvise will be at all the fly fishing shows, the Virginia Fly Fishing and Wine Festival, and the Texas Fly Fishing and Brew Festival. Also, if you need to do some extra Christmas shopping, from now until 11:59 p.m. EST on Christmas Eve, if you purchase a Norvise e-gift card of $100 or more, you will receive 25% off your next Norvise purchase. For all the details, head over to www.nor-vice.com today. Now, on to the interview. Well, Eric, welcome to The Articulate Fly.
Well, Marvin, thank you very much for having me. Hopefully you won't have to change the name to the Inarticulate Fly.
I'm sure that won't be the case. And we have a tradition on The Articulate Fly. We always like to ask our guests to share their earliest fishing memory.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot of memories that don't include fishing. So it was, I'm probably going to say I was 3 or 4 years old at the oldest, maybe. And my father was a sailor, and we had a sailboat on the eastern shore of Maryland and on Chesapeake Bay, and spent a lot of time in the marina. And I saw the fish around the docks and everything, and I was bugging my dad for a fishing rod, and finally he said, all right, in the marina store, he said, I'll buy, I was eyeing up this, Zebco, spin casting rod. And I was like, I really want that. He's like, I'll buy you a cane pole in case you don't decide you're not going to stick with it. Well, that was almost 50 years ago. So apparently I decided to stick with it. And, it was cool growing up, being a little kid around that marina. I did a lot of stuff caught a lot of sunfish, a lot of bass, occasional striped bass that wandered too close within casting range, and a lot of big carp and things. And but yeah, that's, like I said, I don't have a whole lot of. I learned how to walk on that sailboat. I learned how to swim in that bay, and I learned how to fish there too, I guess.
Yeah, really neat. When did you come to the dark side of fly fishing?
That was the spring of 1978. I was 10 years old.
Very neat. And how did that come about?
Well, I had a cousin who was he's about 15, maybe 20 years older than I am. And he happened to, he was a fly fisherman, and he knew I liked to fish. And he took me up to northern Pennsylvania in the Pine Creek Valley, and he stuck a fly rod in my hand on the banks of Cedar Run, and I fished up there, Slate Run, Cedar Run, Pine Creek. Fell in, got wet in April, and it's cold, and I loved every second of it.
Yeah, very neat, and we know it's all been downhill from there. Right. Who are some of the folks that have mentored you on your fly fishing journey?
It's interesting. I've thought about that over the years, and I didn't really have a whole lot of people to fish with growing up, and there definitely I did a lot of my fishing by myself, and I did it. I still do, and it was I was basically allowed to run feral as a little kid and as a teenager, and along the trout streams and farm ponds and rivers around my house. And so I pretty much have done it pretty much by myself.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think we're of about the same vintage. And so that whole experience of like no YouTube, right? And, it was library books, and the reality is, right, even like in the 70s, there were not a lot of fly fishing articles in Field and Stream.
No.
right?
No,
And so,
definitely not.
yeah, if you didn't have a grandparent or a parent to take you, or you weren't lucky enough to kind of find someone who was kind of willing to share the secret sauce, you kind of had to figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I did. I just went fishing. I mean, I was already fishing anyway. And so now I just replaced the spinning rod with a fly rod. I was enthralled by it. I think, Saturday morning television, watching Kurt Gowdy and American Sportsman, and I just sat there mesmerized by those tarpon on those fly rods and things like that. And I was like, I want to do that. I want to catch fish like that. I want to go fishing. And, it didn't matter. It didn't matter where it was. It could be the little trickle of a stream, warm water stream by my house, or it could be Chesapeake Bay. It didn't matter. I was ready to go fishing no matter what.
Yeah, and then the next step onto the dark side was you were tying flies. Do you remember your first vise and the first fly you tied?
Yeah, I do. I was about 12 years old, and I had a Thompson Model A, and I was pretty sure it was either a gold ribbed hare's ear or a woolly worm, one of the two. I can't remember exactly which one, but I remember tying a ton of those gold ribbed hare's ears. My cousin told me, "Yeah, you got to have that fly. It's a great fly." So I did my best to spin up some of those, and I'm pretty sure that was one of the first, if not the first.
Very neat. So was that kind of like, I guess what we have now, we have those Wapsie kits that have that type of clamp vise with some of the materials. Is that kind of how the materials came, or was it different?
Yeah, it was. I didn't have a kit. I sort of pieced together some stuff from my cousin. He gave me some materials, but no instruction. And I kind of went to, I did read a lot about fly tying and fly fishing, and by that time, 1980 rolled around, and there were a few magazines that had some flies in them, and I read those things till the covers fell off, and I think that I don't remember where I got all the materials, but it definitely wasn't a kit. It was definitely piecemealed together.
Yeah, and it's also too, I mean, back then, you're a little bit luckier. You're in Pennsylvania, but one, you couldn't mail order a lot of stuff, and two, there weren't a lot of fly shops.
No, there definitely weren't. As I got older, and a little bit older, I was fortunate enough to grow up about 15 minutes away from Bob Clauser's shop. So he was, if you want to say I had a fly tying mentor, he didn't really. He always was very helpful and very kind to me growing up. I got my first Renzetti vise from him when I was in high school, and he was always very helpful and kind to me, and willing to share ideas, and a little bit of cynicism too, but that's how they are.
Yeah, it's interesting. I can remember talking to him about developing the Clauser minnow, and him talking to me about how the dumbbell eyes were originally gremlin weights.
Yep.
And so it's just kind of interesting to see kind of how that got figured out. And if we let a fair amount of water go under the bridge, you're now the owner of Riseforms Fly Fishing. When did you get the guide bug?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I think this was like my 22nd season. So I kind of eased into it. I don't know that I got the bug. I kind of had to be cajoled into doing it. I kept hearing the words, you should guide. You should be a guide, and at the time I was tending bar, and, I'd run into some people who were fly fishermen. I was living in State College and Pennsylvania up there, fishing up there a lot. And, we talked to people, and, how we had successful. I wound up going fishing with a bunch of people and here and there. And, I just kept hearing that over and over again. And finally I said, all right, well, I can, it wasn't a big deal to hang out a shingle and kind of, say, hey, if you guys somebody wants to go fishing, we'll go. And then I guided a little bit for TCO, probably about 18, started that about 18 years ago, here and there, not a whole lot, because they were still just in Reading at the time. So I would go down there if they needed me. I ran a couple hosted trips for them over the years, in the early years. And, it just sort of, I didn't really want to rush into it. I actually, it was a little intimidating to me. I thought, it was always when you fish and you go out, it's always different. You know, I'm always trying to figure out the puzzle, and maybe I just wasn't overly confident enough to say, yeah, I'm the greatest. You know, I should show you how to fish. You know, I still am a little hesitant to that. I think I like to go fishing with people, and we try to figure it out together. And I try to, you know, talk, you know, to them what I'm thinking about when we're throughout the day. You know, how we're doing it and why I'm doing something. I think it's interesting. So now it's to the point where, you know, I'm busier than I want to be, and it's getting it's a blast. I love it. I still love it.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because I noticed on your website, you know, not only are you doing, you know, I guess what folks would consider to be kind of traditional, you know, like central PA guiding, but you also have some educational things that you do through your guide service. You want to let folks know about those too? Yeah,
sure. Absolutely. I have, you know, I offer, you know, some stream entomology trips, if you want to call them that, where we'll go out, we'll talk about the time of year, and we'll, you know, I'll do a little kick sample and look at some bugs, and hopefully we'll see some adults flying around if it's the right time of year, and we'll try to identify them and talk about the, you know, the roles that the insects that we're finding, what they play in the trout's diet, and the role they play in the aquatic ecology of the stream. And it's neat. I don't get as many people to do that as I think I guess I wish I did. I love doing it. But it's definitely something that I think could benefit a lot of people. I think, you know, to be a really successful and confident fly angler, especially, I think you need to observe more than anything. And if you have a little bit of knowledge going into it, what you might expect, it helps to sometimes to figure out what's going on when no one else seems to be able to catch fish. You might have a little bit of an edge. Yeah, but I mean, you know, you're buggy, right? Because I mean, we were talking in Parsippany, and like we've got common buggy friends, like you know Matt Green, and he's a buggy guy, and I remember from my interview with Jake, he was like, well, you know, I've got this guy, and I show him a bug, and I tell him it's this, and he's like, no, that's not what it is, and that's you, right? I guess, yeah. I of course, nobody would know if I was right or wrong, but I do. That's my background. My education is aquatic ecology and aquatic entomology. I love that stuff. I think that, having that understanding, it certainly isn't going to work against you as a fly angler. I think that Paul Weimer, kind of makes and I'm going to paraphrase him from the book, The Bug Book. He talks about, having a thorough knowledge of aquatic insects is kind of like being able to cast the whole entire fly line. Do you need it constantly all the time? No, but to be able to make a cast and be confident in your casting and having that knowledge of the aquatic insects is, it just gives you an edge. It gives you an edge of understanding what's happening around you when you're trying to figure out, what the fish are doing, what they might be doing even before you go. It gives you kind of a heads up if you do a little homework and get that knowledge base. And I'm always learning about that too. And that's the other cool thing about it. It's always changing. I always see something new. There's always variations and things. And, there's one thing about fly fishing and bugs and fish, that the only one thing I know for sure, and that's that you never say never, and you never say always. It's always something a little different. So it's, the entomological, knowledge that you can gain over the years if you just take a look around, turn over some rocks, pick up some bugs, and there's a lot of good resources on the internet these days. Trout Nut is a great website. A lot of knowledgeable people in there. If you can't find the bug you're seeing in their archives there, you can always post a picture of it, and somebody will help you out. And, I'd be happy to help people out. People send me pictures of bugs all the time and ask me what it is. And I'm happy to help anytime.
Yeah, and you got some gorgeous photography on your website of insects.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I enjoy that part.
Yeah, so it's interesting too, because I mean, it's one thing to like kind of dig into it to kind of up your game on the water, but what was it, when you were in school that captured you and said, I want to study this?
I think it's just something that I felt comfortable in. It was something that I had always done. I think it was like, maybe it was just a general inquisitiveness, even from when I was a kid. I grew up in a rural area and I just wanted to know what I was looking at. And, it was kind of just, I wanted to know. I wanted to know what that thing crawling around on that rock was. And, I'll never forget. I was in the 7th grade in a biology class, and the curriculum that year was, it was an entomological, they had to go through the orders of insects. And, my hat just so happens that my science teacher was a fly fisherman. And I started, I knew all of them already, all the orders, and especially the ones that the trout ate. And, I wound up tying flies for that guy for years. Helps with the grade.
Yeah, absolutely. That's pretty neat. It's funny. So a lot of the retired science teachers from my high school worked at my hometown fly shop for the discount after they retired.
There you go.
So you talked about kind of easing into guiding. Who are some of the folks that kind of mentored you on your guide journey, and what did they teach you?
Yeah, I think if I had to pick somebody that, I didn't really have anybody that said, here, this is how you should guide, this is what you should do. But I'm in an area that has a lot of really, really talented anglers, and, one person I'm going to pick out here and is Tom Baltz. I never really like rode along with him or, said how. I asked him a whole lot of questions, but I'll tell you what, I always paid attention to what he was saying, and I still do. And not only about guiding, but fly tying and, the history of our local area here. He's a treasure. And he's a great person to talk to. And I pick up a lot of stuff just by being quiet and listening, and it happened over the years in the fly shops too. Just kind of, especially when I was like a teenager, I would listen to what these guys were hearing. And I'm talking about guys like Vince Marinero and Charlie Fox who come into the shop, and I was there and I never said anything to them. I just listened.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I mean, kind of when you think about that kind of like late 70s, early 80s, I mean, that was kind of how it was when you were a kid, right? Yeah. You were just kind of happy to kind of be around where all the action was, and you just you were well behaved, and to your point, kept your ears open, and you could learn a lot of stuff.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting too, we were talking in Parsippany, and, I guess earlier this year, I guess it was probably I think it was in May, you released a book, Favorite Flies for Pennsylvania. And I was curious if you could share with me and our listeners a little bit about the genesis of the project.
Yeah, sure. Honestly, it was really never on my radar to even write a book. But I had a small contribution to a book called Keystone Fly Fishing, and the editor of that book was Jay Nichols. And one day I was in the fly shop, and he approached me about writing the book for Favorite Flies for Pennsylvania. It's part of a series of books on fly fishing locations throughout the U.S. and fly patterns for those areas. And I was, it sort of caught me off guard, like I said, but I was certainly flattered, and I was, I was a little scared to do it at first, but he talked me into it. Apparently,
he seems to have that effect on people.
Yeah, right.
It's always amazing. I mean, when you look at kind of what people think of as kind of being kind of the current fly fishing literature, how many of those books he's responsible for bringing to market. It's pretty incredible.
Oh, it's amazing. Jay has been involved in so many just unbelievable amount of books and fly fishing books. And if there's hard to think, you'd be hard pressed to find somebody else in the industry that's had their hand in so much. that's come out of the publishing world and fly fishing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you were encouraged to write favorite flies for Pennsylvania. Did you have a particular angler in mind when you wrote the book?
Yeah, definitely. I wanted the book to sort of talk to a fly angler who's never been to Pennsylvania to fish for trout, and to buy the book and read the book and come to the Keystone State with a fly box of patterns that would help them really be successful no matter what trout stream or river they were fishing or the time of year that they were coming. And it was it was difficult in certain respects, only picking 50, because I know I was really overly concerned probably with leaving certain patterns out, because I'm sure there are people out there that say, I can't believe you didn't put this pattern in there. It's the best fly in the state. I can't, and I just had to pick 50. I snuck in some more though, but, Jay was great to work with the book. He's a super nice guy and was always willing to help me out and to listen to what I had to say. It was very receptive to conversations about the book and everything. It was fun.
Yeah. And so, for folks that haven't had a chance to take a look at it, you've got kind of some of the, to your point, like Ed Schink's patterns, Vince Marinaro's patterns, some of those are kind of in the preface, and you've got 50 patterns in the book. And it's interesting because they're really a good cross section of, what I would call, traditional to kind of newer patterns. How did you actually pick those 50 patterns?
Well, what I did was I contacted, some of the people that I know, the best anglers that I know, and some guys here in PA, and asked them if they'd be willing to, let me know what they were fishing every day, and what patterns they thought should be in the book. Explained basically what I just said here to them, and said, if you were coming to PA, what patterns would you give me? 10 patterns that you would absolutely tell somebody they had to have. And from those, it was pretty interesting. A lot of the flies that are in the book came up over and over and over and over and over again. But I also wanted to, feature some Pennsylvania tires and some of the patterns that were developed here, and try to, there are definitely some non-PA flies in here, but I think there's a good representation of some of the modern tires here and innovators from Pennsylvania. Yeah,
absolutely. And, it's interesting too, because, when we were in New Jersey at the Fly Tying Symposium talking, and Tom Baltz was there with us, and it kind of helped remind me, about how rich and unique Pennsylvania's fly fishing culture is.
Yeah.
And it's very different, right? And I don't know how to explain it because, there are other places that have, technical fisheries, but there's just something really kind of unique about Pennsylvania. Can you maybe, I don't know, help me put my finger on it? Because I can't explain it very well.
Well, I think the thing is there's a couple things going on here. I think that the fact that we have so many different types of water. We've got spring creeks, we've got the mountain freestones, bigger ones. We have little brook trout streams. We have large rivers. We have tailwaters. We have like sort of some marginal trout waters where we have migratory brown trout that come in and out. We've got a variety of water here, and not to mention the stock trout fishery that we have here. I think that sets, as far from a historical standpoint, I think that sets Pennsylvania apart from places like New York, like the Catskills, where there's an incredibly rich history of fly fishing and fly tying, but the water types are pretty similar as you go around. And it's more of a centralized location in be it the Adirondacks or the Catskills, where you have these brawling, freestone streams that, and then Pennsylvania, we had the people who came before me and were innovators in fly fishing and fly tying in Pennsylvania. They had a different set of problems to solve. And those different set of problems, be it flat water, super selective, trout eating jacids on the retort, or flat water tailwaters. I think that those conditions and those set of problems that those anglers had to solve are a little bit different than everywhere else, and it was just sort of a timing thing as well. That happened, and then it kind of spread, and a lot of the things that have innovations that have come out of Pennsylvania have spread across the world, and are applicable. Whether you're in New Zealand or you're on the Henry's Fork or you're on the Chutes, Upper Deschutes, wherever you are, I think the variation in our water types and the innovators who work to solve, whether could it be fly design for rough and tumbling waters like altross, Alcaracatus, where it bounces around great. It's a great rough water fly, or you have Vince Marinero's thorax duns or the comparaduns that just solve this different set of problems, but those problems are not unique to Pennsylvania and they travel well. So,
yeah, it's interesting too, because I guess, Pennsylvania is relatively easy to get to, and it's really close to a lot of population centers on the East Coast. So, I guess you also get a lot of anglers that get to do a lot of experiments, right? Yeah,
absolutely. I think that, you had people coming from New Jersey, and Maryland, and those people like Lefty, and those guys would come up and see what was going on in Pennsylvania by the local anglers and kind of spread the word. Ernie Schwiebert is another person that comes to mind. He fished around here a lot. The list goes on, where these people who would come to Pennsylvania look to see what the local anglers were doing and the innovations they were making, and sort of spread the word. And it's interesting, when you really start to dig into it. I'll give a little plug for the fly fishing museum, Pennsylvania Association Fly Fishing Museum here in Carlisle. It's cool to walk through there and take a close look at what all has happened here in Pennsylvania over the years.
Yeah, very neat. And it's a nice segue into my next question. So for folks who haven't had a chance to check out your book, for each pattern, you've got the recipe and you've also got suggestions about how to fish it, but you also include the pattern's history. And kind of to what we just started talking about, why is the history so important to you?
Well, I think it's probably because I grew up here. I grew up fishing in the footsteps of some really legendary figures in our sport. And even as a younger teenager, it was never really lost on me where I was and what occurred on the same banks that I was walking through when I'm stuck in the mud along the Latour. There were a lot of other people who came before me that were doing important things in the fly fishing world, being stuck in that same mud. Since I didn't really have we talked a little bit before, I didn't really have a mentor as such. So when I wasn't, running around the trout streams and stuff, I spent a lot of time reading about fly fishing and fly tying and those names of those streams that I knew and the people that I had heard of or met, that fished them. They were showing up in those same articles over and over and over again. I think that, being aware of what comes before you is important in charting the course for the future of fly fishing and fly tying. There's a lot of stuff that goes into constructing a fly, whether it be a streamer or a dry fly or a new, everything should be on that hook shank for a reason, and if you look in the past, how the tyers and the anglers before us, how they solved those problems, it's worthwhile having a knowledge base of that, because especially in fly tying today, the plethora of materials that we have available to us are great. We can utilize those materials in the same way that those people did before in fly design, to make a dry fly float better, give it a better imprint on the water. It's just like I said, I just think it's important to remember what's going on or what went on before you and how it sort of ties into what's happening now.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, right? Because it makes you humble because you realize that it's what you think is new is not as new as you think it is.
Oh yeah, right. I mean, but that's sort of the beauty of fly fishing and fly tying. You know, a lot of it is derivative, but a lot of times it's there are slight improvements, and especially fly tying and on tackle. I mean, geez, you start talking about fly lines. But a plastic fly line might be the biggest innovation in fly fishing ever. And especially if you want to keep your flies floating and things like that, it is. It's important to understand why the things are the way they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And, kind of following up on what we were talking about earlier, I think Pennsylvania has a really unique concentration of technical fisheries. And there are certainly some patterns in your book that are very specialized. And, we always kind of have this debate about presentation versus pattern, right? And you'll have your own nymphing guys tell you that they can catch fish on pretty much anything. And then you've got other people that are really dialed into matching the hatch, and be kind of curious to get your thoughts on kind of where you shake out on all that.
Well, to me, presentation wins every time, whether you're presenting a nymph tightline a nymph through a run or whatever. Absolutely, presentation wins every time. Casting is, especially from my perspective as a guide, being able to cast is. People always ask me, not always, but a lot of people ask me, at the end of the day, is there anything I should work on? Casting. It's always casting. But back to the presentation versus pattern thing, presentation wins every time. That said, but like you mentioned, there are these technical fisheries. You can present the wrong fly perfectly and be snubbed by a trout on plenty of waters. Especially here, well, not just here, but there's a lot of places around the country that are really heavily pressured and they have prolific insect hatches. I think that there's patterns in the book. Some of them were developed. The CDC bowback caddis comes to my mind right away from Renee Harrop, on the Henry's Fork. I mean, we talk about a technical fishery that is pressured beyond belief. That fly was developed out there, but we have similar conditions here, say on like the Upper Delaware system or Penns Creek or some other place that has a lot of bugs and is heavily. Is fished heavily. Those fish see a ton of flies. So, yeah, your presentation better be perfect, but your fly better be darn good too. So I'm going to say presentation wins every time because there's going to be places where the fly pattern doesn't matter as much, but there's also going to be places where you better have both things going right for you. I think that to be a little bit, and that's what I try to do with the book. I try to have people be prepared for those waters, that you're going to run into people during prime time, beginning of May, middle of May on Penns Creek. You're going to see people, and those people are throwing flies. And, maybe some of these flies in this book will give you a little bit of an edge. Maybe it's something a little different than some people are throwing. Or it's just floating on the surface or moving under the water in just a little bit of different way than some other flies. Or it has some sort of trigger on it that whether that trigger be movement or color or flash, there's something a little bit different about the fly that maybe put the scales in your favor.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's interesting, right? Because you've got varieties of all different kinds of flies, nymphs and streamers and wet flies. But it was pretty clear to me from reading the introduction to your book that you really love fish and dries.
Jeez. Is it that obvious? I mean, to paraphrase Girac, I'm not a dry fly purist, but I want to be one when I grow up.
Yeah, there you go.
I think, it really has. This has nothing really a little bit to do with the book, but I think what attracts me to the fish and the dry fly is a few things, combination of things. First is I'm a bug nerd and I love to solve the puzzle. I love trying to figure it out. What are they eating? what's that bug flying by me? Are they eating the adult? Are they eating the emerger? Is there a nymph struggling in the surface film? You know, is there a caddis pupa swimming to the surface? I love trying to figure that game out. And I think the next thing is this just comes down to it's being visual. You know, I don't know too many fly anglers or any angler who don't like to spot a fish, make the cast with the right fly, and then see that nose come up out of the surface and then hail that dry fly. What's not to like? You know, and here's the other thing I think that kind of trying to say this without offending anyone. The casting, it's pretty simple. I just like to cast a fly rod, you know, and I'm not great at it. I'm not winning any casting contests anytime soon. But here again, you know, I'm back to solving the problem. What cast do I make? Where do I position myself to make that presentation in a way that I think is going to fool that fish? You know, it's pretty satisfying to get in a good position, see a fish that's in a tough spot, and, you know, make a cast, get a good drag-free drift. And maybe that drift's only, you know, 9 inches, but it's the right 9 inches. And, you know, you see that fly disappear. It's pretty cool. And I guess you know, if I had to pick one more thing, I'd say, you know, I'm not a big fish hunter. If I was a big fish hunter, I would probably just throw a streamer. Well, I'd probably just fish bait, really. But, you know, catching a big fish on a dry fly, and when I'm saying big fish, I'm talking over, you know, 22, over, you know, big 2-footers. You know, it doesn't happen a lot. But, you know, when you do your homework and you know the hatches and you know some of the locations where these fish are and what specific bugs bring them to the surface, because they will definitely come up and eat a dry fly. And it may not be always, because, you know, everybody knows that, you know, as trout get to a certain size, their diet changes to, you know, a piscivorous palate there, I guess you'd call it. But, you know, there's something extraordinary when you manage to stick a big trout on a dry fly. The, you know, observation here is key, timing is key, and I guess perseverance is key too. But that's, you know, if you're going to chase big fish, I think perseverance is key no matter how you're fishing for them. But, you know, I guess because there's a lot of hype around streamer fishing and catching big fish on streamers, and I don't know, maybe it's a knee-jerk reaction to that. I find it pretty satisfying to catch a 2-footer on a dry fly.
Yeah, it's funny. While you were answering the question, I'm having these flashbacks to like fishing the bighorn and you know, working specific fish for a while, or doing the same thing down in Argentina, and it's fun for sure. It is. And it's humbling.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of cool to catch a fish on your terms. You know, I think there's plenty of times where if I'm fishing by myself and I'll go fishing, there's plenty of times where I never even make a cast. You know, I'm have it set in my head that I think this is what's going to happen. And if it doesn't go that way, it doesn't go that way. You know, I want to get in that fish's world, and I want to be there when that fish is looking up. And when I'm there, the payoff is worth it.
Yeah, it's also fun too sometimes just to kind of play with them and see if you can get them to eat something they shouldn't, right?
Absolutely. You know, I think, and you'll see that. You know, I'm going to talk a little bit. Maybe this is off the subject a little bit, but you know, early mornings, I think, is a good time to do that. I think early mornings is a good time to find a big fish on the dry fly during, you know, prime hatch season. You know, May, late around here, it's May, early June. We have lots of caddis in the evenings, and in the mornings when you have all those dead spent caddis and spent mayflies that kind of get knocked loose from a little eddy somewhere, those fish will get along the banks, and you'll see some pretty big noses poking out early in the morning when they still feel safe in that shallow water. And I think it's a good time to target those fish. I think that, and again, you can throw all kinds of stuff at them, and they're just, I call them garbage eaters, but you know, it's whatever's coming at them, they're going to eat it. You know, they don't get super picky. They're just there to chow down for the morning breakfast buffet.
Yeah, it's funny too, because it's something crazy like when you're walking a stream bank and you can actually hear them smacking.
Yep.
Yeah, it's pretty slick. And, we touched on this a little bit earlier in the interview, but, even if you aren't planning to fish Pennsylvania, can you kind of remind our listeners how they can use your book to kind of help them up their game on their home water?
Yeah, I love this question, actually. I think a whole bunch of the flies in the book travel really well, and really, after all, the patterns come from some of the fishiest people I know. There's no doubt that the flies catch fish. Most of the nymphs in the book are either attractors or general imitators of, immature aquatic insects. And, any place that there's mayflies and caddisflies and stonefly nymphs, the patterns in this book will work. The dry flies are easily, I did this consciously too, the dry flies are easily adapted to different hatches across the country, and even across the world, really. I know small changes in the color of the body materials on, say on like Henry Ramsey's thorax stone is a great dry fly in here. You just change the color scheme and maybe change the hook size to whatever you need in your local waters, and the materials are relatively simple and easy to get, and you're in you're there, you're in the game. The patterns that I have included, they're included more for their construction than their coloration. I think that the silhouette or the imprint in the surface foam allow some of the dry flies to excel in different hatches or different water types, or even lighting or seasonal conditions like Tom Baltz's Paranym. Depending on the wing post color that you use will allow you to fish it in different light conditions, and that applies no matter where you go. It's a great generalist dry fly that can be fished successfully anywhere. And the streamers in the book, they're streamers, and streamers work anywhere that big fish eat smaller fish. There's some great couple great sculpted patterns in here. I have the Game Changer in here, which is just a phenomenal platform for everything. And a lot of these places, not only in Pennsylvania but other places, are heavily pressured, and so maybe you're taking a fly that might not be a local favorite, but it's just something a little different than those fish are normally seeing, which might give you an edge. Back to Tom's Paranym, take that thing and throw it on a picky riser on the Missouri River. Maybe that fish hasn't seen that fly that often. My money's on that Paranym that fish will eat it if it's the right size. So I think with the nymphs, subtle coloration differences on the triggers, on the attractor nymphs, it just, maybe there's a certain color that works better in your local area. So you switch, say, the Frenchie to instead of a red, thorax, you put on it has a yellow thorax or whatever. Just picking colors here. Just change them up a little bit. And that's why they're there. The same applies for the waters of PA. I think they travel well, I guess is the bottom line.
Yeah, I think it's amazing, if you're lucky enough to get to travel to fish a fair amount, and particularly fish in heavily pressured water, and you talk to the guides, and gosh, you go to Montana and they're like, they just don't like beads. And if you're like me, you fish, relatively sterile freestone streams in Western North Carolina, you're like, how can they not like a bead? Right. But it's like, well, they've gotten stuck a lot. So, yeah, it's interesting. It's fun, and it's funny because there are lots of different tying books that I find, I can always find patterns that work really well kind of in the mid-Atlantic for me.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, and again, I think it comes back to, especially on heavily pressured waters, you can throw something that they don't see a lot of. I think and the silhouette's right, the size is right, or the trigger's right on it. I think you're going to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we'll kind of segue to the blocking and tackling. I'm always curious to ask authors, how they like the writing and the editing process.
It was great. And this kind of goes back to Jay. He was, like I said, he was incredibly helpful and supportive throughout the whole process. I think the biggest thing that was a surprise to me was sort of how, and maybe it shouldn't be a surprise, but how easy the writing came, because apparently I can just blather on about this stuff. But I really love the photography part of the book as well. Again, Jay's expertise there. There's a little bit of a learning curve, but to doing this kind of photography. But I'm especially happy with how that turned out. The other really fun part of it was just to talk to people about it and talk about flies and talk about techniques and talk to other people who are into it just as much as I am, which is great. I don't always do that. So.
Yeah, very neat. And so did you kind of write the book episodically because you got 50 patterns and you kind of have a framework for how you want those 50 patterns to be presented? And so did you kind of sit down and kind of write them one pattern at a time?
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just knocked them out one at a time. I would get into it. I was able to talk to some of the creators, like Craig Matthews for the X-Caddis. He's super generous with his time. Renee Harrop was another one who was very, very generous and spent some time talking to me about the flies and the patterns and how they came about. And, those people, it was, like I said, it was one of the best parts of the whole experience is just getting to talk to those people and get what their take was on why they did what they did, why the construction of the fly is the way it is. It gives you insights into if you're a tyer like I am, it gives you insights into making some tweaks and some other patterns for yourself, and who knows? Like I said, sometimes I rely really heavily on throwing something that's just a little different than what the fish are seeing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I can imagine like you'd have like a long phone conversation with one of the originators, and then you'd be like super stoked, and you would just bang out the fly writing.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, like I said, I can talk about this stuff all day long, and I just had to sort of rein that in a little. There was some significant editing on a lot of them, but and most of that came from myself. I thought it would be harder to sort of talk about, okay, well, this is a dry fly kind of thing. But it really just kind of flowed, and it was overall, it was a great experience. And we were a little delayed with COVID and all, but that just gave me a little breathing room, made me feel better to go back and edit a little bit. And, it actually worked out okay.
Yeah. Well, so you're one of the people that it didn't make you not want to write anymore. So do you have another book project in your future?
I don't know. I've kicked around some ideas, but nothing right now.
Got it. And kind of anything else going on in your fly fishing world you want to share with our listeners?
Doing some presentations here and there to some groups, and really, what I'd really like to talk, like take this opportunity to say is just to say thank you to everybody who's been supportive of the book and who helped out with the book, and those who've been nice enough to come fishing with me, and who knows what's going on in the future. It could be another book, could be who knows, anything. As long as we can make sure we keep conservation on the forefront of our minds and try to protect what we have and make the good things, the bad things better, and the good things, keep them good. I've got really nothing immediate coming up. So like I said, I just want to take the time to thank everybody.
Yeah. And so, the great thing too, right, is, for you, right, you bringing a book out during COVID, basically no fly fishing shows, right? Very different way to promote, but, knock on wood, we're all a little excited about, what we're going to see happen in early 2022 on the show front. Do you have any, shows you plan to be at or any events you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I'm going to be at the Lancaster show in March. I'm not going to be able to make the show in New Jersey. I think I'm going to Mexico. But the Lancaster show, I'll be time flies, and I'm planning on giving a few presentations at that show. So hopefully some people will come out and say hi. it'd be great to see everybody. It was nice at the Fly Tying Symposium to get to see everybody there and almost back to normal.
Yeah, it's nice too. I like that event because it's really subdued, and so it gives you, I was talking to someone else earlier this evening, and it's like, when you're at one of the other shows and you're talking to a tire, you kind of feel like you're in an autograph line at a rock concert, and
right.
You only get a certain amount of time to talk, and then people are kind of giving you that look like you need to move on, and and so it's nice like at the symposium because you can like have a nice long conversation with a tire and really kind of talk about stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really nice. And there's some phenomenal tires there, some modern day innovators there. It's really cool. I didn't get a chance to walk around as much as I wanted to, but yeah, it's definitely neat to talk about. I had some interesting, some super nerdy conversations about hooks and things like that. So yeah, it was fun.
It's so, it's timely, right? Because we're heading into the holiday season. Where are the best places for folks to find and purchase your book?
Well, I would encourage people to contact their local fly shops. And if they don't have the book, you can always reach out to me via email or social media, or the book's available online from all the online sellers like Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, and my contact information can be found on my website, which is riseformsflyfishing.com, and I have a social media presence. Instagram is at riseformsff. Fly fishing, and I'm also on Facebook under my name.
Oh, well, cool. Well, I'll drop all those in the show notes. And if folks wanted a personalized copy of the book, are you selling those through your website?
Oh yeah, they're not. You can just contact me. I don't have the ability to sell over the website, but we can do PayPal or whatever. If they contact me, via email or phone call or whatever. Like I said, my contact information is on the website. So.
Yeah, you might have a few extra copies around the house.
Yeah, maybe. Although not a whole lot, honestly.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing too, right? So, well, listen, Eric, I really appreciate you carving some time out for me this evening. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, me too, Martin. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure, and it was great to meet you and to talk to you here tonight. And I hope you all have a happy holiday. Great to hear.
Absolutely. Same to you. Take care.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed that as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. Tight lines, everybody. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.